Hi, welcome back to the President's Tech Brief. I'm your host, Uli Bayraktari, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Martin Razor.
Great to be back.
Good to have you, Martin, as always. For everyone tuning in for the first time, the name of this show is a nod to the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. That briefing is the gold standard of intelligence, summarizing the most critical threats and developments for the President of the United States. I've seen that process firsthand. I know how vital that flow of information is, but I've also seen the gaps. So the traditional brief often struggles to keep pace with the sheer speed of emerging tech and how it's reshaping our national power.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, I've spent my career in the intelligence community. I know how hard it is to connect technical data to real-world strategy in a way that's actually actionable. That gap is why we're here, and that's exactly why we're doing this show.
Exactly, Martin. We wanted to move these conversations out of our conference rooms or our team meetings and directly to you. So every Friday, you can watch us live at 11 a.m. Or if you don't have at 11 a.m. time, you can follow us on our podcast and YouTube and other channels that Martin will speak briefly. Here's what you can expect every week. We will be translating policy for the technologists and the technology for the DC decision makers, plus the latest on the high-stakes tech race with China and what it means for the global leadership. And Martin, over to you to explain what's going on below the screen.
All right, so first up, the ticker below is our tech scorecard. So get used to seeing this. It's our definitive look at the US-China tech race. We're tracking the strategic front line in real time, and when the balance shifts, we'll be here to tell you why. Now, next, the scroll at the bottom of your screen is part of our new AI intelligence system. While the world gets buried in data, our multi-agent filters cut through the noise. So what you're seeing isn't just news, it's the strategic signal moving the needle on global competition. And finally, we want you in the mix. So post a comment wherever you are watching or send your take to our Signal handle. That is scsp.250. We're live monitoring your questions right now, and we'll be responding throughout. That handle again on Signal is scsp.250.
And Martin, for the first time today, we're going on multiple platforms. So I think we're live on Meta, Substack, LinkedIn, and of course, YouTube, and I think Instagram. And so please put your comments, questions on any of these platforms that you're watching us. And of course, as Martin mentions, on Signal.
Absolutely.
And we'll look forward to your feedback. Let's start by the hot topic of the week, Iran conversations. I'm joined here by Ylber and Chip from our team. Gentlemen, welcome. Chip, you had an incredible podcast on Monday with a long-standing Iran observer from your old days at CIA, Norman Rule. Let's play a clip from your podcast, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Right. So Iran's current missile arsenal is capable of reaching, obviously, targets all around the region, Israel, and striking as far as Europe, but they don't yet have the ICBM capabilities. So it's of critical importance.
That's correct. Their nature, their warheads are also relatively simple, but they're talking about MIRVs, independently targetable warheads, multiple warheads. This is now being added into their arsenal, and therefore constraints are important if you want to avoid additional conflicts in the region.
Chip, a big week for U.S.-Iran. A lot of capabilities are in the region. What do you expect is going to happen?
Yes, well, I think it's been an incredible week of ratcheting up tensions. In that podcast with Norm Rule, one of the key things that he said at the beginning is that diplomacy isn't dead yet. I think since our podcast on Monday, diplomacy really is hanging by a thread. There were two important events yesterday. The first is there were 6.5 hours of talks between the U.S. delegation and an Iranian delegation mediated by the Omanis that, according to all sides, ended inconclusively, though the Omanis pointed optimistically to a fourth round of talks, technical talks, that are supposedly going to be held next week in Vienna. What I noted is there was sort of a muted response from Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff, the two U.S. delegation leads, about the talks. So we'll see whether those actually produced a breakthrough or not. I tend to suspect probably not, based on what press reports was a very tough U.S. proposal that essentially called for Iran to completely dismantle what's left of its nuclear program and in exchange for minimal to zero sanctions relief in the immediate term. So very tough terms. What we know of the Iranian position going into the talks is they were looking for some sort of 3 to 5 year suspension of enrichment, more aggressive sanctions relief in exchange for such a concession. This seems well out of the bounds of what President Trump is going to accept. The second important event from yesterday was the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Brett Cooper, briefed military options to President Trump. And as we've seen reported extensively in the press over the last several days, there's been an incredible force buildup in the region. The United States now has 2 aircraft strike carrier groups, one in the Eastern Mediterranean, one in the Arabian Sea, roughly 400 aircraft amassed in the region and in Europe, and that's not counting global strike capabilities that would be launched from the United States. It also doesn't include what those carrier strike groups also have, which are submarines and Aegis cruisers capable of delivering dozens of Tomahawk missiles. So I think we're really at the precipice of potentially a military conflict. Today, the vice president should be getting a briefing from Omani Foreign Minister Busaidi, sort of outlining the last Iranian position. I expect that will not be accepted. The president 2 weeks ago implied that come Monday or Tuesday, that would be the end of his patience. So I think, the next few days will really tell the tale.
Ylber, you have covered this issue for a while at the Pentagon, at the White House. What's your take on this?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Chip. I think military action appears imminent, even if the diplomacy, as Chip put it, is hanging by the thread. I think we're seeing already some tactical indicators. U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is drawing down. U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is drawing down. We saw reports that China has asked its citizens to leave Iran. So these are generally the indicators, I think, that would suggest that military action is coming. Now, I would also put this a bit in a historical context. This is a clash that's been brewing for nearly 50 years. Every U.S. president since President Carter has faced a decision whether to use military action against Iran. President Reagan faced the same thing, President Bush, President Clinton, and all the other successive presidents. So this is a no surprise, I think, that we've ended up here. Chip is right. I think the negotiating positions appear to me irreconcilable. So I think, all the trends seem to suggest that we're moving in the direction of military action.
Yeah. So, Ylber, I had a question for you. So the UK Prime Minister is not allowing the United States to use British bases for any type of strike. What are the implications of that for US force options?
Yeah. Great question, Martin. So obviously, I'm not privy to those discussions, so hard to characterize how much truth there is behind those statements. But UK does provide generally helpful access to its bases, namely, the base that they maintain in Cyprus, which will be important for the defense of Israel against Iranian retaliation, as well as the access to a base in Diego Garcia. So again, I don't know sort of like what the ultimate verdict is, where those conversations are with the UK, but the access to those bases would be important. But I suspect if the answer is no from the UK, that the Pentagon has worked through alternatives.
Chip, one last question for you is, to me, it feels like the Iranians have not accepted the reality of what's going on since, 12-day war, Operation Midnight Hammer. Their rhetoric still is reflective of, pre-events that happened that degraded their capabilities, I think. So I think you have sort of like a mismatch of reality and ambition in terms of diplomatic goals. But in reality, I think there's not much left there, between the capabilities that we have in the region, obviously Israelis, there. I don't think that they realize that they don't have a strong card anymore, with what happened in the region since, October 7th.
Well, I agree with you that their ability to strike back, by the way, I do think if the United States and Israel were to attack Iran, there would be some form of retaliation, but I think it would be measured and degraded compared to what Iran could have delivered, 6-9 months ago. That said, I have a slightly different take. I think Tehran actually sort of has kind of priced in the possibility or probability of a U.S. strike. The issue for them is regime survival. And to capitulate to or accept what the U.S. had put on the table in Geneva, would have been regime threatening, I think, in their estimation. I think they've considered that they may have to live without a nuclear capability, but having done so without having to capitulate to the United States may be an unwelcome but potentially acceptable outcome.
And not to mention, I mean, the internal protests, 20 to 30,000, casualties from the regime against its own citizen. I think, as I said, I don't think the cards are as they used to be on their side. And so I think we're getting at the point now that, maybe this president will really complete what something was started, as Ylber said, for many, many administrations ago.
Yeah, with technological advances, improvements to the U.S. forces, I think it's within the grasp of President Trump to actually get closer to that obliteration, to use that term that he used a few weeks ago, that obliteration level of destroying Iran's nuclear capability with the forces that they have in the region. We'll see whether Iran blinks. They only have a few days to make a decision.
Part of the challenge here is that you're absolutely right, Uli, that Iran has never been in a weaker strategic position, probably since 1979, with its economy, the proxies, and its military capabilities in shambles. The challenge here is that you're dealing with a supreme leader, an individual who hasn't left his country since 1989, has not traveled anywhere, rarely engages with counterparts. So he just may lack the strategic foresight and the flexibility to make changes to this new reality, and as a result may end up bringing his regime down, which is something that he has tried very hard to preserve for all these years that he's been in power.
Yeah. Gentlemen, we got to switch to another topic. Chip, thank you. Ylber, we're going to keep you because the next topic is something you covered last week. Thank you so much, Chip. As always, please watch Chip's podcast, Intel on the Edge. Amazing conversation this week. Thanks, Chip.
All right. Thank you.
Moving on, Martin, I think a big topic this week is not just DOD or DOW and Anthropic, but there are a lot of issues involving Anthropic. The DeepSeek angle. Yep. That David, welcome back. Good to have you again. But let's start with Anthropic and DOW. It's Friday by 5:01 p.m. Anthropic was supposed to give DOW an answer. Obviously, we have a graphic that Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, last night issued a letter on the website indicating their position. So let's start with analyzing this a little bit, and then David will move on to other topics related to Mexico hack, Chinese espionage, and all the other things. Ylber,
Yeah, absolutely.
your take on-
So as we talked last week, the Pentagon and Anthropic are at loggerheads over use of Claude in classified systems of DoD, with Anthropic insisting that the Pentagon adhere to two principles encapsulated in Anthropic's user policy, namely that its models not be used for domestic surveillance on massive scale, and then secondly is that the models not be used for autonomous lethal weapons. So as you suggested earlier this week, the Secretary Hegseth welcomed, or as press put it, summoned CEO Amodei to the Pentagon for a last-ditch attempt to try and resolve these differences. Looks like those conversations did not really result in any significant breakthrough. Anthropic issued a statement yesterday saying that they intend to continue to abide by the users' policies, and then Pentagon also sort of turned up the public rhetoric around this dispute. So we'll see. The deadline is tonight at 5:01 p.m. Undersecretary of War for R&E, Emil Michaels, suggested this morning that there's still room for negotiations and talks. So maybe the deadline gets moved, or we'll see, some decision by that point from Secretary Hegseth.
Yeah. Martin, you've watched this space also closely.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your take on it?
I'll be interested to see what Congress does. I know there's a lot of discomfort on Capitol Hill that this discussion is happening out in the open.
Right.
I completely agree. This should have remained behind closed doors. This is not a food fight you want to have out in the open. Supposedly, Senator McConnell is writing a letter, I think largely looking to lower the temperature, encourage renewed discussions, And to Ylber's point, Undersecretary Michael, I think, extended an olive branch in a sense in order to get the conversation going again. It's a very difficult issue, right? Because ultimately here you have a government agency that wants to do certain things with these amazing technological capabilities, and a company saying, wait, hold on, we're not comfortable with that. And that's ultimately the crux of the debate, right? Who determines how these technologies ultimately get used? The government, a democratic government that is, of course, elected, or the company actually developing the technology. So that's the key debate at its core.
I think you're right. As I said last week, I think this is an unfortunate situation for our country. I think we should not get ever in this position in which on one side you have a government agency that is, the main purpose is really to wage wars and train and man and equip our warfighters. On the other hand, you have a company that has an incredible capability. In the age of AI, they have probably the most critical capability. And so, Martin, you're right. I agree with you. These conversations should never escalate in public. They should be hashed out privately. I think it sends a wrong message to our adversaries, first of all.
Absolutely.
I think it sends a wrong message to the American people. We did a survey, if you remember, Martin, last year. American audience is generally skeptical and worried about the lethal autonomous weapon systems. People that have never worked or never served, they don't understand the nuances about what we're talking about here. So I think this will only put more caution and more risk averseness among American citizens. At the time when our adversaries are getting bolder, more aggressive, they're adopting these capabilities faster. So I think it's an unfortunate situation. I hope both sides get to a point that they cool off a little bit and then they find a mutual language to solve this issue. But gentlemen, any thoughts? David.
I mean, just to add to your point, Zelia, I think sort of the unintended consequences are, in my view, threefold. One is I think it's reinforcing this narrative of doomerism about AI, right? That AI will eventually lead to super surveillance states and the emergence of lethal autonomous weapons beyond any human control. So it's playing straight into that AI doomerism narrative. The second is I think it really undermines the trust in the institutions, particularly in an institution as important as DoD, and the trust in the U.S. military. So I think the public brinkmanship is really not helpful. Then the last thing I would say is, and you'll remember this from the Pentagon as well, is that there's been tremendous progress since 2014 in terms of building bridges between Silicon Valley and other silicon outposts in the United States and the Pentagon, right? This relationship did not start on a strong footing. There was enormous distrust back in 2014, but DoD worked really hard and met willingness on the part of Silicon Valley to partner. So I worry that on the back end of this, if this is not handled in private and through sort of contractual challenges, that the schisms will reappear and will be less safe, and the principles that Anthropic likes to uphold may end up being I think weakened.
Yeah. David, anything you want to add?
Just to riff off of that, Ylber, I think undoubtedly Anthropic's competitors will see some opportunity in this, right? But putting yourself in the shoes of a small startup, a small defense startup, I do kind of wonder what kind of chilling effect this may have on companies wanting to do business with the Department of War, especially. And again, it's unfortunate that this has spilled out into the open, because once it enters the public space, it becomes politicized, and all appetite for a practical, pragmatic solution starts to diminish over time.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
I would say in particular the threat to place Anthropic on the supply chain risk list is very chilling, right? That is deeply concerning to me, that we would even contemplate doing that to a U.S. company where there are companies from adversary nations that are not on that list.
And not just Anthropic, but it would have implications for companies doing business with Anthropic.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think, David, to continue with you, Ylber, thank you so much. Staying on the Anthropic team, they were on other headlines this week. Number one is DeepSeek really building their next model by taking a lot of data throws from Anthropic and training their model based on that. So your comment on that, David?
Yeah, and all of this is so DeepSeek has really dominated a lot of the China tech headlines this past week. 4 stories in particular that we wanted to talk about today. Most of them having to do with DeepSeek, but I think they need to be all read together. And of course, all of them are coming out in the lead up to DeepSeek's hotly
Release,
anticipated version
Right.
4, which may come as early as next week.
Right.
So the first story is on the Anthropic theme. Anthropic published a report pointing out how 3 Chinese AI startups were distilling its Claude model. In particular, DeepSeek was among them. DeepSeek conducted 150,000 exchanges, according to the Anthropic report. Moonshot AI did 3.4 million exchanges. MiniMax did over 13 million exchanges on Claude. And as a result, Anthropic said that it was going to be, by the way, Anthropic being one of the most critical frontier labs of China, said that they're going to enhance a number of security measures to mitigate these kinds of distillation processes. The second story was a Reuters report talking about how DeepSeek was limiting access or had access to banned Nvidia Blackwell chips. So these are
In Mongolia.
in Mongolia, right? Which is a really interesting
This is so
detail to the
fascinating, right?
report. But important to point out that these are not the H200 chips that the White House has approved for sale, and it's unclear whether or not any have actually shipped to China yet. But these are the Blackwell chips, the leading edge, top of the line AI GPUs that Nvidia is selling right now. And of course, according to the report, if this is true, this would be a clear violation of export controls. But I do think that it's not so much, this may not be a story about how export controls work or don't work, but I think it's more of a story about how first, China has just a vast array of options and methods to gain access to these chips.
Right.
And 2, I think going back to the Mongolia piece, it's a really interesting aspect of the story, and I think reflects China's Eastern data calculated in the West data center strategy, which is that a lot of the urban population naturally is in Eastern China. But a lot of the energy resources and land, frankly, are in Western China. And this is why Mongolia is a site for a lot of these data centers to kind of compute.
Incredible.
And it's also easy to hide, right? It's
easy to
a
hide,
vast area, very thinly populated. For me, these stories, I mean, for one, the distillation attacks, I mean, this is industrial espionage, right? And it's happening at a scale that I think policymakers should be very concerned, and we need to
Can
do
I just
something
add one
about this.
thing,
Yeah.
Martin, there? Because for those people that still doubt China as a competitor, they have been doing this for more than 10 years on any technology. Steal, build their capabilities, and then deploy it globally under a new name, championed by the central government. So when people get shocked that, oh, we're in tech competition with China, like how many more examples do you have to show them?
Exactly.
That this is a clear playbook
And it's
that they've
cost
been
us
playing.
hundreds and
Exactly.
hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And it's been a long-standing problem, to your point. And then with the Inner Mongolia story, so it's fascinating, right? Because on the one hand, you have all these distillation attacks, stealing American IP, and then at the same time also using U.S. chips to train the models that they're effectively stealing from us. And that just shows a very interesting dependency on American technology still. So I guess you could paint that as some kind of a silver lining in the sense that, to me, this indicates that Chinese companies are quite far behind and not particularly confident in their own capabilities at this point.
It'll be interesting, David, next week if they release the model next week.
See how good it is.
To see how good it is.
I mean, the other story too was that DeepSeek withheld sharing or previewing its version 4
with Nvidia,
and AMD, and instead shared it with companies like Huawei so that they could have a head start in optimizing their hardware stacks ahead of the V4 release. And to kind of sum it all up, I think all of this does show how China is going to try to leverage every ounce of advantage that it has in the AI stack to in this AI competition, be it illicit distillation, gaining access to banned chips, and I feel like this AMD V4 preview story is somewhat at a lower level, but it still goes to show that China will use every advantage, big and small,
to get a hold. And unrelated to this topic, David, German chancellor was in visiting Beijing this week, and this video made the rounds. Dave, let's watch the video first, and then Martin and David, if you want to comment on the significance of this video. David, what do you make of this video?
No, I mean, you have to admit that it's an impressive show of
Absolutely.
what Chinese humanoid robots can accomplish. And of course, this is happening on the heels of China's Spring Gala Festival, where they also, as part of this annual, the whole nation tunes in to watch this during the Spring Festival. They did a big showcase of Chinese robots dancing and doing mixed martial arts. And it does show, just again, China's prowess when it comes to manufacturing, scaling these forms of embodied artificial intelligence. Whether or not humanoid robots are the future of robotics is a big open question, but it certainly leans to one of China's baseline industrial strengths, which is manufacturing. And
Martin, if you were German chancellor watching those robots, what would you think?
I would be very nervous, right? Because Germany's facing this classic dependency trap. Its companies rely on access to the China market.
Right.
And at the same time, China's capacity to overbuild will eventually overmatch German companies in their own markets. And
I mean, when you think about it, this is a European power that is known for industrial capacity, building cars, building machines. And here you have a German chancellor really facing an incredible robot. I mean, those of you that have tracked Unitree, a couple of years ago, this company didn't even exist. And look at where they are now, building one of the best humanoid robots in the world.
And a lot of it is based on knowledge obtained from German companies, right? And China's car industry is built on IP and know-how from Volkswagen, because they were one of the first foreign car companies to go in when Deng opened the Chinese economy. Volkswagen had 40% of China's car market at one point. Now they're struggling. They just closed their first car plant in the company's 90-year history just last week. So things are quite dire for Germany. I do not envy Merz's position because he's got a very difficult needle to thread.
But David, and this is the last question before we move to the next topic. Merz was another European leader that visited Beijing. We talked about all these leaders in the previous shows, going to Beijing. And we had the UK Prime Minister. We had, I think, Macron, if I'm not mistaken.
Carney.
Carney.
Farmer,
and now we have German Chancellor.
And then Trump coming
and then
up.
the president in April. David, you have followed this issue, keep following this issue. What's your take on the latest trip?
And I think we've said this in previous shows too, but this is quite the lineup ahead of Trump's visit in April. Of course, next week, I guess in 2 or 3 weeks, China will be releasing its 15th five-year plan. And so zooming out, you can see how from China's perspective, this is all a very carefully choreographed lineup of heads of state visits. And again, the release of the 15th five-year plan, all pointing to Xi in the middle. As being in control and being in power.
David, thank you so much. We're going to switch to another topic. Martin, a lot of news last week in terms of jobs. There was another big report that was released online that created massive shockwaves in the market. We have Ryan here, an eternal optimist about the future of jobs and workforce. And Naya will join us shortly to talk about the President's State of the Union, because the President also covered some of these topics this past week. But Ryan, talk to us about the report. Why did it create such a shockwave in the market, and then the counter reaction?
Sure. So if you're watching, there are a couple things you need to know. Citrini Research released a report called the 2028 Global Intelligence Crisis. And it's making a couple of assumptions here. One is if the AI bulls are right, or the AI optimists, and that companies will adopt AI rapidly and create what they call the human intelligence displacement spiral. Basically, companies will take on AI, they'll fire humans and workers, but then the margins will shrink because they're not paying out salaries, so they adopt more AI. So the second thing is, but this report is it's a scenario, not a prediction. And so the second thing that came out of that is something called ghost GDP, where these companies create GDP, but it hollows out 70% of our economy, which is basically consumerism. So you're paying people less, so they buy less. So you create this spiral. As you can imagine, the reaction was swift. The markets reacted, dropped 800 points. But we also, as a historian, I'm going to put some context here. It was actually the same day as the tariffs announcement from the Supreme Court, and the same day Claude said it could replace COBOL within companies. So that actually had a bigger impact. The one reaction I want to talk about is Citadel's. And they throw some stats at this report to say this is actually a different narrative. So unemployment is still at 4%. That's still pretty good for our economy. The second thing is that indeed, software engineering job postings have improved 11% year after year for the past 5 years. And the last is there's really no evidence that companies are incorporating AI into their systems faster than they were a year ago. So Citadel said, where's the fire to Citrini's research? The bigger question is this hit a nerve. Much like the segment I did a couple weeks ago, it is in the social conscious right now. And it's almost like it tells you more about you and your opinion about AI, is if you take this optimist route on AI, or if you think humans are going to be far more important or part of this process. And also, I think a lot of people, when they see AI, there's a little bit of helplessness in this process. And so if you assume 2 years from now that AI is just going to take over everything, it's like there are stops along the way that people have to hit. So that's kind of the gist of the report.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was an interesting thought exercise, but there were some significant flaws to it, right? I mean, well, for one, the timeline. You go from manageable unemployment to an extreme scenario in 2 years' time. It's way too compressed. There was also, and I think the Citadel rebuttal did a nice job with this, right? And just because AI can improve itself doesn't mean its integration into the economy keeps compounding. But at the end of the day, here's this hypothetical scenario, a flawed one, that's then treated as news and is moving markets. And to your point, I think that's exactly why it's a nice reflection of just how uneasy people feel about AI disruption. But there's so much noise out there, and that's why I think what we're doing here is so important, right? Such as with your task force, for example.
I knew you'd pitch. Thank you so much,
You're
Martin,
very
to pitch
welcome.
to me for the AI, the task force and the future of
part
work.
of the show,
And our summit in 2 weeks, the AI Plus Education Summit, because these things matter. They matter to everyday Americans. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about is what you talked about. There's a difference between, yes, these models are improving, yes, it's exponential, but that does not mean they're being adopted. Exactly. And there's a big difference there. And if historical trends hold, there's the S-curve. And so far, we've not seen AI break that S-curve mold.
Yeah, it should be just like automation that we've seen in the past, would be my prediction.
I feel like every week we're going to have an article like this going forward.
I'm so sorry you're going to see me every week.
You're
gonna see me every week. Ron's gonna trot out.
But I just feel like every week we're gonna have an alarmist article like this. Number one, and number two, everything that's gonna happen on the job market will one way or another be attributed to AI. Whether people are gonna lay off people just because this was a post-COVID buildup or COVID buildup, or any other kind of streamlining of businesses, everything will be attributed to AI. I mean, you saw what happened with Block last night. Massive shockwave again. 40% workforce laid off.
Right.
So I think every week, I think, Ryan, will see you and your face here on the show.
I'm so sorry.
Talking about this issue, yeah.
But you're right, Block. It matters because he actually just had, if you look at the stock price, it went up 15 points today.
Right.
But the context, we just had an inflation report come out, so the Dow dropped 600 points. And so you have this constant mix and flow of, and so seeing the truth is going to be hard over the long term.
Talking about the impact on the ordinary citizen, Naya, the president talked about the data centers and the electricity bills and all these things. Can you summarize all those things for us, please?
Yeah, I think really late in his historically long State of the Union address, he mentioned how he secured a pledge from all the top tech players and AI players in the field to commit to paying for their own power for these AI data centers. And you're exactly right. This kind of issue of who pays for electricity, who bears the brunt of the data center build out, and all the power that it's going to take to power AI is really coming down to the local level. And a lot of everyday citizens are really upset about that. So secured this pledge, and POTUS is actually meeting with tech executives next week on Wednesday to officially sign this agreement for them to kind of have this behind the meter build out of AI and power.
Naya, I have a question from Alexandra from Virginia. She moved here from Maryland. Her question is, am I going to see my electricity bill increase because of the data center focus and centered in Northern Virginia?
I think that depends on the local and state governments and what's happening in your communities. I think it depends on the power agreements that already exist. I think in Northern Virginia, it's Data Center Alley, so they have some kind of historical agreements with utilities, and that may or may not affect your electricity prices. But I think this behind the meter or tech companies paying for their own power should probably not affect your electricity prices now. But it's a good point. I think something that we need to think about is, as AI is not the only thing that is going to take electricity, right? Your computers that connect to these chatbots also take electricity. And as the world becomes a little bit more electrified, we're going to have to raise our power generation in general. So bigger dynamic, I think, at play for sure.
Yeah. Our energy infrastructure is a choke point, right? Not just for artificial intelligence, but just for economic growth in general. So we do need to make that investment in new and improved transmission lines, et cetera.
Naya, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Our last segment, Martin, as always, is how did we use AI in the office? So I think we have an interesting video from one of our colleagues, Aiden, and how he used AI in the office this past week.
Hello, my name is Aiden Isaac. I'm a producer for the President's Tech Brief, SESP's latest live show. My main role is to help collect the news topics that we choose for every week and writing the scripts and doing the research to make sure they fit with what we want to talk about, just making sure it all flows together seamlessly. It can be a little bit of an overwhelming task sometimes, taking care of the news all the time, 24/7, especially with the current news cycles. So my favorite tool of choice is Claude Cowork. Let me show you. So this is Claude Cowork. Basically, this can access the files on your computer that you give it access to, and we'll be able to access that without having to use the internet, and that'll essentially go into the prompt. So it'll know all the information that you give it, and then it's actually able to make new files on your computer. So I'm going to take the topics that we used from the last PDBs and use it to create a spreadsheet summarizing the topics and giving them a theme overall, and then we'll do that. So this is what it ended up creating. It created a real whole Excel spreadsheet with the previous guests we've used, the topics we've used, and then giving them a summary of what they talked about during those topics. And even gave a strategic theme for every single thing that we do and category for our little departments at SCSP. So yeah, this saves us a lot of time, gives us a lot of clarity on the topics that we do. This took 4 minutes. It probably would have taken me 2 hours to do this on my own. So that's how I use AI in the office.
Incredible. Martin, let's do a round of how each of us used, or one example of AI in the past week in the office.
Yeah, well, this wasn't in the office because this was for personal use. So I went to one of our chatbots and asked it to put together an itinerary for a road trip. So I want to go to Cincinnati, but I want to take the slow road. So some nice back roads for good driving. I want to visit a few bourbon distilleries and have a nice place to stay, and then end up in Cincinnati on day 3. And so put together a nice route. I do want to double check it, looking at an actual map to see how exactly I'm being routed, but it gave hotel recommendations, restaurant recommendations, gave me approximate times for various segments, so very useful tool. The prompt was quick and easy, and I got a result back that looks quite good in 30 seconds. So big time saver.
Naya?
I think I say this every week. I co-write with AI a lot, especially like Claude for writing. I like its prose, better sometimes versus others. So that's, I think, the biggest way of just compiling. Right now we're working on a net assessment where everyone's kind of contributing to their pieces. So ask Claude to kind of combine them as one, make sure that the tone and the structure is the same across everyone on our team, kind of writing in their own style.
Fascinating. Ryan?
And Mark, you're going to Cincinnati on purpose, right?
Well,
Okay.
I did live there for 8 years of my life.
Okay.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
I'd love to hear you go.
And I want to try the skyline and
I was just going to say, I want to
to
report on that chili.
Yeah.
Actually, mine is, so I'm on a board for our camp at a church I'm at, and there was real problems with the app, people signing in. So I was on our advisory board last night, and I was like, I bet you I could vibe code this right now. And over the course, I wasn't paying attention to the meeting, but I was vibe coding, like literally produce an app that actually parents could sign up for to actually come to the camp and upload documents like during the course of the meeting. It just took an hour. And so there's the capability you have, like these people are like, well, I don't really know what to do. Like here's a technical problem. And I'm like, well, I don't have the software engineering degree, but like I have Claude code. I'm like, and so I produced an app and showed it to them, like, and we might actually use it just because these are solutions in real time that you can produce.
That's very cool.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Ryan. Naya, Martin, this concludes our 4th live show. Thank you so much, guys. Please consider yourself briefed. Thank you for joining us. As always, like and subscribe on all our platforms and share with your network. And we'll see you next week.